Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bridgend Political Hour. I'm sorry about not doing it yesterday. I had some things I had to do myself, and I'm glad I actually delayed it because delaying it actually got me a guest this week. And I will bring the gentleman in now. Please welcome Alex Williams, Councillor for Pencoed and Chair of Scrutiny 1, is it?
Yeah, good evening, Luke. Yes, I'm chair of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, and I'm chair of the Scrutiny Committee 1, which focuses on education principally, but also has other responsibilities as well. So I
Yeah,
have a busy, I have a very busy time.
yes, I did watch your Scrutiny Committee meeting the other week, and I will get into this a bit more later, but it was good to see that both yourself and Freya Bledsoe were actually letting people speak. Because if we go back to the council budget meeting earlier this year, we can see what it's like when people aren't given their right to speak or even their opinion is taken note of. But it's great to see you and Freya actually letting people have their opinion, and that because that's what scrutiny is all about. That's what you're all there for, is to have your opinion to find the best solution. So it's
Yeah,
good work you and Freya are
that's what
doing.
we're there for. You know, if you're a chair of a committee, you've got to try and be fair and allow all your members to have
Yeah.
a view, and obviously have your own views yourself. Make sure that you cover the topic in detail, and then scrutinise any cabinet decisions which come before your committee. So that's the whole purpose of our role, really.
Yeah. On a personal note, I really want to thank yourself because I know yourself and Freya as chair of scrutiny committees, and I've already thanked Amanda personally. She came on a live stream about what happened with the Atlantic and the Fairways Hotel because
Yeah.
I didn't personally know at the time that you were actually going to bat for us. It was after that I found out you and Freya were holding the cabinet and the housing to account and trying to find a solution. And I thank you for the work you did on our behalf for that.
Yeah, we were quite heavily involved when the actual situation was occurring, and I was keen on ensuring that the issues surrounding that came before us at the last Corporate Overview and Scrutiny
Yeah.
Committee. Of course, I think the staff need to be congratulated on actually turning it around, and
Yeah.
actually having some kind of solution for people in the end. But I believe, and I expressed this in the meeting, that it should never have got to that stage whereby they were procuring housing solutions for some of the most vulnerable people in our society
Yeah.
at the very last minute. So I hope they will have taken some of our suggestions on board, that the procurement of these housing solutions needs to be started at a much earlier stage, so that commercial providers don't necessarily hold the local authority and therefore the public purse over a barrel. And I
Yeah.
think that was the case in this situation, without mentioning any specific commercial providers.
Yeah.
That was the situation which we found ourselves in during that crisis. But hopefully it resolved itself for those people concerned. And on the wider point of housing and social housing, all of the empty properties and some of the voids which we have in Bridgend, County Borough, that's going to be discussed at a joint meeting of scrutiny next Monday. Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which I chair, and Scrutiny Committee 3, which Councillor Paul Davis chairs. Councillor Davis will be chairing that meeting to discuss the wider issues surrounding housing. But it was important, I thought, to hold them to account, I suppose, on the issues surrounding the housing issue in Porthcawl.
Yeah. I'm pleased for my sake. In the last couple of weeks I've watched a 6-hour general council meeting, yours which was going on for just about 3 hours, I believe it was, and Freya's scrutiny 2 meeting that went for roughly 4 hours this week. Please can we make them a bit shorter?
Well, my meetings are always very long. I don't know. It's obviously my poor chairing. I should try and make
Well,
sure that they're not so long. I should.
no,
Um,
it's good in a way because a lot of people get to speak and a lot of people get to voice their opinion, which it should always be. Well,
yeah.
if it takes longer, it takes longer. It's the best way to find a solution.
Some of
Anyway,
the papers, the council papers, for
yeah,
example, at the last meeting, there was a huge agenda. There's over 510 pages to wade through. There was there were questions. There was a motion from me as well on home to school transport. Everything was discussed at the last meeting, partly because of the sad passing of Her Majesty the Queen, of
Yeah.
course. So that was an unusual meeting, but hopefully meetings will be shorter in future.
Yeah. Anyway, we'll move off that now. We're going to discuss Pencoed. You're no longer just the councillor for Penpresk, you're the councillor for Pencoed, one of three now,
Yeah.
since it's been combined. And in the first few months, it's been quite busy for you with a lot of announcements, with boundary changes in Parliament, the LDP, and the project of Tunnel End, which we've just mentioned. Is there any? Would you like to update on something? Because Alex does his own updates every week on a Friday. He was lacking
Usually,
last week
yeah.
because he decided he wanted to go on holiday, and it came out today about 3 hours ago, which I watched just before we started.
Yes, I was
But
in Budapest last week, so apologies for the late updates. But I try to be as accessible as possible. So I put out a weekly
yeah,
update on my Facebook page, usually every Friday, just to update people on the latest within Pencoed and the wider county borough. What basically they need to know in about 2 or 3 minutes, just summing up everything that I've been doing and what's happening within the county borough and Pencoed. Yeah, so over the last few months, obviously since the election in May, it's been quite a busy period. As you mentioned, we've had the announcement from the Boundary Commission about the proposed changes to and we need to be careful with this because there's been
yeah,
some confusion in that people have thought that by sort of annexing Pencoed and Penprisk to the Rhondda, that
there, right?
we would somehow be part of Rhondda Cynon Council. And now that's not the suggestion as yet. It may pave the way for that in the future. We don't know. But this is just solely for the election of our Member of Parliament. Now, I've put in representations to the Boundary Commission to say that I didn't feel that we had a particular affinity with the people of the Rhondda and the communities of the Rhondda. Don't forget, there's a mountain called Mynyddig in the way of
Yes,
places like Tonnerefail and Porth and Ferndale and Treherbert. We don't necessarily gravitate towards those communities. We gravitate towards Bridgend.
Jen.
So it seems curious as to why they've done that. I don't know whether. I think I said in one of my updates, I think they gave a toddler a crayon and just drew a line around certain communities based on population statistics. Now, I think they need to be a little bit more cognizant of the fact that we gravitate towards certain communities. And you're going to find if these proposals go forward, you've got Bryna and Llanharan just to the east of where I am here in the Pontypridd constituency. Then you've got just to the west of us and to the north, you've got places like Black Mill and the Ogmore Valley, Garrow Valley, and Trinity Valley, and Brinkethin, and all of those other communities in the Bridgend constituency. So it's a very strange and curious way why they seem to have annexed the whole town of Pencoed and, of course, the more rural parts of Helakew and Rupiliog onto the Rhondda. It just seems strange to me. So I've made representations to that effect. No, I don't know whether you have any comments on that, Luke, but otherwise I'll go on to the local development plan.
I think it's only because it's been many years now that Pencoed, Bridgend, Maesteg, and Porthcawl have been affinity to one another. Yes, we have. There's a little spats that we always get. Somebody gets more money than the other one from the council, but we've all got this interlink. We are essentially one large community, and you need to stick that. You start breaking communities up. That's where things are, and you've got basically two masters serving you, the MP representing Rhondda, and then you've got Bridgend County Borough Council, which is it gets awkward, and you don't need that overlap sometimes.
Yeah, well, of course, on the other side of the constituency, then, it's
Yes,
not my area, but I would imagine that the members in Porthcawl will be a bit aggrieved that they're going to be annexed with Port Talbot and Aberavon, and you've got places like Kevin Cribble, for example, which are closer to those areas, which stay in Bridgend. So it seems rather strange,
yeah,
so the way in which they've done it.
yeah. Well, I've had a nomination for a flat by the council, and it's in North Canelli, which will become part of Aberavon.
Okay.
as well. So it's splitting a community that's historically grown up as one together.
Yeah.
Even though you've got four separate towns, it's one large community, really. So that's what I think. If you carry on with your
Yeah,
updates, and
no, we'll see where the Boundary
yeah,
Commission finalise. Could change based on some of our representations. We don't know, but as I say, there was some concern in some respects that we'll be joining Ron the Cannon Tav, or it might pave the way for that in the
yeah,
future. On the flip side, some say that it would be a benefit to Pencoed and Penbrisk to be part of the Ron the Cannon Tav because of their performance on. I think they have a different way of recycling, for example, and waste collection, and they have a historically lower council tax rates. So some people are content, some people are aggrieved. You're never going to win in local politics, unfortunately, with everybody. But I just would like to see our affinity with communities maintained, and I hope that they take that into account rather than just taking pure population statistics and
yeah,
then combining communities which don't necessarily have that affinity or which
that
gravitate towards
identity
each other.
together. Yeah.
Exactly.
So okay, next, what do you want to go on to next? Is it the crossing at Pencoed or Tanawern,
Yeah, we
which
can do
coming
it.
up?
Local development plan is a big one for Pencoed, obviously, and
Yeah.
the Cardiff Capital Region City Deal funding, which has been allocated to the regeneration of Pencoed. It's going to be a massive, massive scheme for Pencoed. Highly disruptive, of course, and it's important that we get it absolutely correct. What will happen for those people who are watching who don't know about Pencoed or what this particular scheme is? Just briefly, Pencoed is split in half by the railway line, as some people will know. And the proposal is to close the railway crossing altogether in Pencoed, which is near the very centre of Pencoed by what we call the monument, but the cenotaph,
So,
and create a square there whereby potentially we could have a regeneration of the square with shops, cafes, etc., and it'd be pedestrianised essentially. So removing any kind of vehicular traffic over the crossing, and the benefit of that, of course, will be that there'll be more regular train services from Maesteg. So you'll have half-hourly train services from Maesteg rather than the hourly train services. That, of course, is a bonus. You would also have the dualling of the Penbrisk Road Bridge. There's a lot of congestion at peak times in Pencoed, and of course, dualling that road bridge would mean the traffic lights could be removed with possibly two mini roundabouts at each end of that crossing, and therefore it would potentially reduce the queues which occur at peak times in the heart of Pencoed. However, what ought to be mentioned, and I mentioned this in my my deposit local development plan consultation response. Unfortunately, there wasn't a response of any meaningful nature from Pencoed Town Council, which was disappointing. But I submitted a response to say, well, until such time as we have the widening of Hendra Road and a better link with Hendra, which is to the west of
yeah.
Pencoed, then we need to ensure that the moratorium on development west of Pencoed is maintained, because we can't have a free for all for developers to develop lots and lots of houses to the west of Pencoed, which would only cause mayhem in that part of Pencoed and therefore have the detrimental effect of actually increasing traffic. So this needs to be borne in mind, I believe, by the planning authority at BCBC and be included in the local development plan. If it isn't, I won't be able to support that. Because there needs to be sustainable development within Pencoed and not just blanket approval for lifting the moratorium on planning within that part of the town.
Okay, should we move on to Tanawern, because there's a consultation will be coming up for that soon? But
Yeah,
as
well,
you mentioned in
Tinawine, yeah,
Tanawine,
Yeah, Tinnerwine. That's actually in Councillor Tim Thomas in Councillor Mark John's ward, I think. Of is it? I can't remember the new
Um,
wards now. Anasauda, is it?
St Bride's and
They-
Anasauda, isn't it?
that's right. It's St Bride's and Anasauda. It's just slightly over the border from Helix, but Helix the
Yeah.
closest main community to the Tinnerwine solar panel development. This forms part of the Bridgend Energy Hub, an organisation called Kenin, which is based down in Stormy Down, and has a wind farm down there. Is developing a sustainable energy scheme, which will eventually include new onshore wind or just above Hilicu on Manadagair, right next to the current wind farm there. But also but in advance of that, it'll be the solar energy park near Tinnerwine. That's going out for a pre planning application consultation soon. Residents will be receiving brochures next week, and the organisation would like residents' views and feedback before they actually submit their planning application for what will be quite a large solar energy development west of Helicu. It'll have some disruption, I suppose, in the initial stages of construction. But I've been assured by the chief executive of Canon that apart from ongoing maintenance, there won't be regular HGV traffic through Helicu, unlike there is at the moment with the wood factory, which is currently there, but I believe that's closing soon. So that could be a positive development. But I suppose what I would like to see is ensuring that any funds towards community projects are also provided from the developer. And I know they're already supporting Helicu Rugby Club in some of their activities. So let's hope that continues. I think as part of their plans as well, Luke, there's going to be a Bridgend Energy Hub, a transportation hub at MacArthur Glen. So that's going to be all part of the same energy project which they're running.
Yeah. I'm mindful of time because I know I haven't got you for very long today. So we'll move on to the reason for the live stream, which was a Scrutiny 2 meeting in regards to Porthcawl regeneration and the compulsory purchase order.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say Freya did a fantastic job chairing that meeting. There were a lot of problems with getting the cabinet member online, and she did a good job delaying because the cabinet member should be there to answer questions. Okay, you've got the leader of the council there, but the cabinet member is the one who's spearheading the project, and they need to be asked questions. It's
Absolutely,
good to see. It's good to see a cabinet decision being brought to scrutiny to be scrutinised properly, and it was good to hear from many members who spoke on that day with their reservations, with what they thought, and it wasn't just members of the scrutiny committee talking. They had three people from the community speaking, and a couple of councillors who weren't part of the committee actually speaking as well. So it's good. I know you haven't watched the meeting; you're not part of that scrutiny group. But what is your feeling on the compulsory purchase of the land at Porthcawl?
Right. So I was one of the signatories to the call in for this. So I was the principal councillor which called this matter in, along with a number of my colleagues, some of whom were committee members.
And you had a statement read out by Della Hughes, didn't you?
Well, I was going to present the rationale. I was going to present the rationale for the call-in because I was the principal councillor who suggested that it should be called in for further scrutiny. And the reason for that is simply because we were lobbied quite vociferously by Porthcawl Town Councillor, Councillor Jamie Strong, who was one of the representatives, also the Porthcawl Civic Trust and Sustainable Wales, about the rationale for the decision. And I thought that it needed to be scrutinised in more detail by members to provide some kind of assurances and to give the public that voice. Because my understanding was that during the consultation period, and to be fair to the local authorities' officers at the cabinet meeting which considered this matter, they didn't hide the fact that there were 97% of people who objected to the plans. But we wanted more assurances on the reasons behind the appropriation of all of the land which was going to be appropriated. So unfortunately, I couldn't attend because I was abroad, and the very important matter of the Care Inspectorate Wales report had to be scrutinised in detail, which took over 2 hours. So unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend in the end because that went on a little bit long. But essentially, the rationale was to ensure that those people who attended had that voice, and also to ask why they needed to appropriate all of the land, because and to rehearse some of the objections which people had. So, for example, there were concerns about the loss of open space for recreational purposes, for example, the massive changes to Griffin Park, exactly. Concerns about the number of proposed housing at Sandy Bay, the lack of investment in tourism facilities, and also the impact on the wildlife and ecology. So I'm very pleased the Scrutiny's taken this role, and I think it's going to happen on future occasions, so that not only backbench members, but the public has assurances that Cabinet has fully considered all of the ramifications which could be at stake, from such an important regeneration project in this part of the county borough, and to ensure that all consultation responses are fully taken into account, because there's a duty under the Wellbeing and Future Generations Act to ensure that they go above and beyond considering some of the issues, and to ensure that local people's views are taken into account. So those are some of the reasons why I called it in, and I approached my colleagues then, and it only requires a chair and 3 councillors to call it in, but a number of other colleagues wanted to hear this being examined as quickly as possible. What happens then, just for those people who are not aware of the process, is that it needs to be called in and heard by a committee within 5 working days. As it happened, Councillor Bledsow's committee, Scrutiny Committee 2, was meeting within that period of time. Otherwise, an extraordinary meeting would have to be called, and therefore it went to Councillor Bledsow's committee, which was perfectly fine, because Councillor Bledsow was one of the signatories anyway. You had Councillor Hughes there, and I think you had Councillor Amanda Williams on the committee as well. So there was sufficient members of the who had attributed their names to the call-in to question both the cabinet member, and I know she had technical difficulties at the time, which resulted in the leader having to step in. But I think the committee in the end were content that it had been scrutinised in detail. And I think, as far as I can gather from colleagues, I haven't reviewed the recording of the meeting, but I think they're going to provide some comments in writing about how Cabinet can improve their the ways in which they work in the future.
Yeah, I got the sense from when Mrs. Nightingale was actually presenting that people weren't against regeneration of Porthcawl. They were more, it's got to be the right regeneration for that area. And I think the biggest thing I got from that was people aren't pleased about so many houses on a waterfront that attracts a lot of tourists. Personally, I think it's silly. We all know what Porthcawl is like on a bank holiday weekend when the sun is blazing out. You're queued all the way back past Thicketstone, all the way to Lallaston to get into Porthcawl. Now, with this current CPO and further LDP, they're taking away Porthcawl's 2 largest car parks, which will leave them with 1 main car park, which is very tiny in the centre of Porthcawl. Yes, you've got the Co-op multi-storey as well, but that's mainly to be used for people shopping at the Co-op. It's bad enough when you've got these car parks, which is the Portway car park, which will be the bus terminal, the park and ride system, and then Sandy Bay, which you're going to have a Aldi built there, and they want to build more houses on there. So yes, I can understand we want to cut down on people travelling to places environmentally in that by putting in a park and ride system. But as we know now, our bus services over the last 5 years, number of routes are being cut and cut, and it was only a couple of years ago that BCBC didn't want to fund the buses anymore. So how is a park and ride system going to work if they're not willing to fund on a normal route? And buses don't run to normal times on bank holiday weekend as it is. So I don't think there's been proper looking at the cost. If we could do that and if it worked, it would be great. And if BCBC could fund it, it would be perfect. But we know we're coming into a time where budgets are going to be really heavily cut, really tightened and squeezed. Are we able to afford this?
Well, transportation links to Porthcawl absolutely need to improve.
Yeah.
But I suppose one final point on this is that I watched the cabinet meeting on this. I was actually in the chamber for it, and Janine Nightingale, who's the corporate director for communities, for those who don't know, she leads that particular directorate. She mentioned the point that the appropriation of the land, which was the subject of the call-in, were not necessarily connected with the corporate
with the planning.
compulsory planning compulsory planning orders and the placemaking strategy. However, they're intrinsically linked. Because you have to appropriate the land for the CPOs to take place and for the placemaking strategy to be adopted. Now, there will be future opportunities for through the planning system to make representations. However, this is the very start of the process. So it's a very important, it was a very important moment in sort of the regeneration of Porthcawl to ensure that it was scrutinised fully. And as I said, I'm very pleased that Councillor Bledsoe gave it such thorough scrutiny, and to your colleagues on the scrutiny committee to ensure that those people who had objected, who had bombarded us really with their objections in the process of leading up to the cabinet decision, had that voice in the public domain.
Yeah, and that is the thing. At the end of the day, that's what you're there for, is to represent the people, whether they're your constituency or not. Really, you're still there representing them on a county level.
Well, that's the thing. You see, if you're a chair, for example, like I am, you have two hats, don't you? You have your Pencoed and Pembrisk hat, where you do the day-to-day work of making sure everyone's got their bin bags and all sorts of others.
Potholes are done.
Potholes are done, and all sorts of other stuff like that. Like everyone has to. But if you're a chair of a committee as well, you have to have that overall strategic view of the whole of the county borough and ensuring that different policies and every single public service is scrutinised and public service delivery operates in the best way possible for all residents across the whole borough.
They said that because Miss Nightingale went on a lot about this, that it's not set in stone, it's not predetermined. But I remember when Tonti development was being voted on 4 or 5 years ago now, the fact it was said in that meeting, it's in the LDP, so we can't really refuse what's there. They've got this in the LDP with the 900 homes on that area. So, the council have agreed the LDP. It's gone to now Senedd for approval. So it's not set in stone LDP wise because the Senedd could come back and say something, you need to change this completely. But it's very rare that ever happens. But so if it's in the LDP, it is predetermined what they want to do, which is build, as they said, 900 homes across the thing, which they said 30% will be social housing. That's 270 homes out of 900. And we know that won't happen because you can see Park Derwin and Broadlands, the amount of, they actually got more planning permission for more houses than that was in the LDP in both areas. And the amount of social housing got cut, which will happen again because it's let's face it, it's prime property real estate. You build a house there, it's going to go for a lot of money because you're right on the waterfront. Is Porthcawl. So you can see the amount of social housing going from 30% probably down to 15 to 10%, which would be cut in half. Where our biggest problem at the moment is the social housing, as we've seen recently discussed. But I'm not going to get
I
onto that.
don't know off the top of my head about whether there needs to be a certain proportion of housing which needs to be allocated to social housing. I
I
can't remember the percentage now.
I
But
think it's 9 or 10%, something like
okay.
that.
Well, we can certainly explore that in next week's
Yeah,
meeting on the 14th about housing and the need for more social housing within Bridgend County Borough. So I'm happy to take that up next Monday, Luke,
yeah, and
with
I'll
the
watch it on
officers.
Tuesday. The other thing that caught my attention in that meeting was it was said 3 times that Sandy Bay is private land, privately owned land. Now I know part of it is, in a sense, an asset owned held by Porthcawl Town Council. Part of it is, and I remember 20 odd years ago with Jeff Jones and thing about purchasing Sandy Bay car park back then. Later on in that same meeting, Miss Nightingale says that they already own the land. So how are you trying to purchase land that you already have an ownership? We're purchasing it to protect the ancient sand dunes, but if you already own the caravan park, the Sandy Bay car park, because I remember it was a big thing on the news back in 20 years ago with Jeff Jones, because it wasn't long after that he had the spat with Brett Exton as well, and that's why, and things like that. So I don't know if Sandy Bay is actually owned by BCBC still, whether they sold it or whether they didn't actually purchase it. But I do
Right.
know part of the asset, because it's in Porthcawl Town Council minutes, that they actually hold an asset of the land because Trecker Bay were getting permission to park a few caravans on there, and they had to go to Porthcawl Town Council to get agreement as well.
I
Because
see. Okay. Well, this is slightly out of my comfort zone, to be honest with
yeah,
you. But um,
no,
no, I would
it,
imagine they don't own. I would imagine they don't own the land. Otherwise, why would they need
mm,
to appropriate it? But yeah, of course, if they do need to acquire that land, then inevitably somebody will benefit commercially out of that appropriation.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but it's slightly out of my comfort zone. It's not my neck of the woods.
no,
But yeah, all I can say is that uh, there was a necessity to, in my view, to call in this particular decision to
yeah,
explore all of these issues. And I think Councillor Bletzer and her colleagues gave it, gave it justice. Did it justice? Have
very much so.
have noted. Some very important points which cabinet should consider in the future about making these kinds of decisions, which will affect communities for a generation or more. And hopefully, when they consider other similar projects in the future, such as the ongoing redevelopment of Maesteg Town Hall, for example, which is coming up for a cabinet decision at the next cabinet, they'll bear some of the comments in mind, which have just been provided by Councillor Bletzer's committee. So yeah, it's one which I think lessons should be learnt on this particular one.
I don't know if you know the answer to this question or not, but I'll throw it out there anyway. When you're doing a compulsory purchase order, if the council are doing it, do they have to give why they want to purchase it for, say, they want to build houses or recreational? Because in the meeting it was said nothing's predetermined, but the plan is that's gone with it 900 homes and redevelopment space. And then people asking, what about recreational? What about making a seasonal? Even the cabinet member said her family and her all want to see an all-weather facility that people can go to. And yet, when it was explained why they weren't on there, it's because we haven't fleshed out the detail. But you fleshed out
Yeah,
the details for 900 homes. Why haven't you fleshed out the details for recreational
I
use or
I think
all-weather use?
I'm not a planning expert either.
No.
I've never sat on the planning committee, so I wouldn't have the details behind this. But as far as I'm aware, in any compulsory purchase order or any planning application, they would have to set out all of the details, in full. And then that would go for consultation then again. So what I suppose Miss Nightingale and the planning officers are saying is that just because the land has been appropriated, it doesn't mean that all of this is going to happen.
Yeah.
There's a strategic aim for additional housing on the land, but it's not a given as yet. That's what they're
No.
trying to say. But what I suppose my colleagues were saying on that committee was that, well, they're intrinsically linked, because the appropriation of the land leads to the opportunity of compulsory purchase orders, leads to the opportunity of fulfilling the strategic aim of the placemaking strategy. So
Yeah.
this is why this was the crux of the matter, in saying, why do you need to appropriate all of the land? Why can't you appropriate some of the land, leaving other opportunities for recreational purposes to be developed, especially on, as you say, Griffin Park?
Yeah, I do hope if they do purchase the land and houses are going up, I do hope they learn lessons from Pencoy Primary,
Yeah.
Brimmen Primary, and Coity Primary, especially with getting children safely to school, but
Yeah.
building the school in the right location as well. So it's and having the services
Well,
up and running as the houses are going up, not wait 6-7 years after they've gone up
that's
to put
another
the
big
parks
one.
in. Yeah.
That's another big one for me. I didn't mention it in my comments on the LDP, but
Mhm.
the other issue for me is that by building more houses, you're inevitably going to have more people. So
Yeah.
therefore, you need to have the public amenities in place, like GPs, dentists, schools, etc., 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 in place before those houses are built. Now, there's an issue with the development of schools, for example. Pencoed Primary
Mm.
School is packed to the rafters. There aren't any more spaces in Pencoed Primary School. However, they've just agreed to spend £900,000 now on two more classrooms. Now, this is only 3 years after the school was built.
Mm. Mm.
Now, they should be able to have some foresight and forecast the population growth within our area, so that the school is built fit for purpose in the first place. Unfortunately, legislation doesn't allow that to happen, and you can only build it based on current population
Mm.
forecasts, or sorry, current population statistics
Statistics.
and intake. Whereas you should be able to take into account the forecasted population growth when you're actually building something like a school. Otherwise, you'll end up spending far more money than necessary.
Yeah, well, Sarah Murphy did bring that up in the Senate a few weeks ago, and it was confirmed to her that they will be looking to do a forecast model rather than current
Oh, well,
statistics,
that's great. Well done, Sarah.
which is great, because we've seen what happened in Coity and obviously, as you say, Pencoed. There's no
Yeah.
point building a school and 3 years later you're having to add on to it because you haven't properly forecast the growth. We are running short of time, so I'll move on to the next thing that caught my attention in the meeting. It's not to do with the actual scrutinising of that. It was a comment that was made. It was Councillor Farr was praised for her work as the cabinet member with bringing this forward and moving this forward, which she must have done a lot of work to do it. And I don't begrudge the work you do. Sometimes it's the outcome. You work hard, you may get the wrong outcome to what people like. But it was also commented about that she did great work in regards to this on Porthcawl Town Council, which she is a councillor. Now, both you and I know councillors have to declare an interest, or supposed to declare an interest when it's prejudicial, and her being a cabinet member, I would have thought she would have. I do have some screenshots which I will add to the stream here. It's not very clear, but in May, this is the May screenshot. Um, it is actually, she doesn't declare an interest in this, and obviously, so she's discussing it, which I wouldn't have thought she would be able to. Particularly, she's the councillor leading from the front of this, and in June, she actually makes a motion in regards to this for Porthcawl Town Council to write to the council on further information.
Yeah.
Now, Councillor Pratt did in May declare an interest being a BCBC member, which fine, and then he brought this appropriation of land for BCBC, Councillor Pratt, Farr and Strong. Now, personally, if I was the cabinet member leader, I was on the community council or town council, I would have declared an interest because it's the right thing to do, because you're leading from the front. You do have prejudicial interests to make the transition as easy as possible, in a sense. I know you've spoken about Pencoed Town Council and how people should have declared interests before and haven't when it comes to co-opting members on to the council there. Do you think she should have declared an interest, or should it be up to the individual to decide that themselves?
Right. So, as far as I'm concerned, and when seeking advice from the monitoring officer, who's Kelly Watson in this case, she always says that it's up to the individual about whether they declare a personal interest or a prejudicial interest. Now, I don't know what comments Councillor Farr has made on this particular issue in the past, so I wouldn't be able to judge whether um, it was prejudicial in any way, because
Yeah,
unless she's most definitely indicated a preference for a particular outcome, where which so therefore it could be considered prejudicial. But I suppose in retrospect, if I were her, I would have said, I'm the local member for, I think she's, what is she, Porthcawl West Central?
yeah,
Oh,
it's actually her area as well.
Porthcawl East Central, Porthcawl West Central, one of them.
Yeah,
I would have said, I would have just noted for the minutes that declare a personal interest, that I'm the local member for X, and also I'm a member of Porthcawl Town Council who have made representations on this in the past. And she could have said, well, I don't consider my role as prejudicial in any way, because all I've done is sought more information on the proposed scheme. And of course, she's cabinet member for regeneration, so this would fall under her brief. But perhaps in retrospect, if I were her, I would have declared a personal interest. If she hadn't predetermined the issue in any way, then potentially she wouldn't have to declare a prejudicial interest. It also ought to be noted that this call-in wasn't making any decisions. So
no.
in that way, I suppose Councillor Farr was giving evidence before the committee.
I'm
So
I'm not strictly talking about the scrutiny committee part. As cabinet member, she should, but I'm talking about when she's at Porthcawl Town Council and being the cabinet member who's actually pushing this project forward. That's got to be a prejudicial interest at the very least, because it's her department, her as cabinet member who's pushing this forward.
so are the minutes which you're showing there, Luke, after she was appointed as
Yeah, yeah. The first time is brought up is 30th of May after she's appointed as a cabinet member, and
right,
then there's more in June and July where she is the
right.
cabinet member who's pushed this forward. So
I see.
to me, being the cabinet member doing it, she should have declared an interest at least at Porthcawl Town Council and not been in on the discussion at all. Whereas she actually makes a motion in Porthcawl Town Council. I'll read it out now. I'll bring it up. Councillor Strong, Councillor Farr suggests that another letter be drafted and sent to BCBC in relation to the proposed development of Salt Lake and Sandy Bay. Councillor Farr and Councillor B. Jones suggest that a leaflet drop, which is fine, a leaflet drop to inform people. That's fine. I think that's in, but I don't think she should be in those discussions at all. We see it in community council meetings. Anybody who's on a planning committee will declare, I'm on a planning committee, and walk out the room so they're not part of that discussion. This is a bit
Yeah.
bigger deal, I think, in terms
Well,
of she's driving that forward.
yeah, well, no, as I say, I think potentially if it were me, then I probably would have declared an interest and may have removed myself from the room, especially if you're declare a prejudicial interest and remove yourself from the discussions, because you have an instrumental you're in an instrumental position of being the
Yeah,
cabinet member for regeneration. But as I say, it's a personal matter for Councillor Farn and personal matter for everybody to declare interest where they want to. If there's a complaint, then of course, either to the monitoring officer, the responsible officer, which is going to be the town clerk in the case of
yeah,
Porthcawl Town
Porthcawl.
Council, or even in the worst case scenario, a complaint to the ombudsman. Obviously, that would have to be looked into. But as I say, the ombudsman sets an extraordinarily high bar for these kinds of things, unless there's been a blatant disregard for any prejudice or a predetermination of an outcome. Then they wouldn't adjudicate against any particular councillor. But the monitoring officer always tells us to be cautious, to declare an interest where we think that there might be any kind of prejudice, or certainly any kind of personal interest. But it's ultimately up to the individual.
It's, I think there needs to be stronger rules around that situation, because it can lead to things like what happened with our bed as well.
Sure.
And I think councils or councillors, we need to be as beyond reproach as we can be. As busy, it's not okay. Some little tangential thing. Somebody's applied to council for a grant. You may know them for a friend of a friend of a friend. That's it. Whereas a clear and obvious, I'd say, conflict in this situation, driving it from one direction and then scrutinising it on the other direction. You've got to step back and say, I'm not going to be involved at this part. I'm going to let my colleagues do it all. I'm going to be out the route.
Well, that's what happens in planning committees, for example. If you've
Yeah,
predetermined your decision on an outcome before actually hearing the evidence or hearing the report in front of you, then you have to remove yourself from the decision
yeah,
making. You must be open to all of the arguments which are set out in front of you.
yeah.
So
That's great.
for example, if I had campaigned on a specific issue and then sat in a meeting and voted upon it in planning,
It's
then
predetermined.
I would have predetermined my specific vote, so I wouldn't be allowed to take part in that, and I would have to declare a prejudicial interest. I would say so.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you. We've been on for 50 minutes. I know you said you couldn't do the hour, so we'll leave it there. Thank you for coming on again. You were my first interview last year, and you're back on again. And I actually might change.
Unfortunately, Luke, I can't do Sundays. So
No, I was
if you
just
do
about
it,
to say
if you
I might change them to Mondays or one day in the week, because I think
okay,
more people will start being available. Sundays, day of rest.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
So I might do that. So I get you on more. I can get Ross Thomas on. I'd love to get Ross on at one point. You, Ross, and Amanda all on, because I think
yeah.
you're the legacy from the last
It'd be
council,
a
and you
good debate.
did fantastic work back then, and you're doing fantastic work again. You're really holding, really now with more independence and two independent groups in the council, you're really holding the council to account now. You're really questioning, because you've got more power, you've more independence, and you work as separate entities, but you work together as well for your communities. And it's great to see, and I think we need more of that.
Just to
Um,
before we wrap up, just to signpost you to a few things that we're doing in the future on our forward work
yeah,
programs. Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which I chair, will be looking at the Disabilities and Facilities Grant, which is well, a lot of people are waiting well in excess of a year for improvements to their homes, such as wet rooms downstairs when they have mobility problems. We're going to be looking at that in our December meeting. We're also going to be looking at the delivery of the cost of living scheme, which is a little bit of a farce in the summer. It went on for. Go on, Luke.
that's in progress again now, isn't it?
Yeah, there's another
The
scheme now,
second
but yeah, the
150.
second part of it. But the original scheme,
Yeah,
there was a lot of delays to that. I think most councillors were bombarded by people who were saying, well, where is it? So we're going to be looking at that, see if any lessons can be learnt. So that's going to form our agenda for December. My scrutiny committee, Scrutiny Committee 1 on education, is going to be looking at the Welsh in Education Strategic Plan, and to see about Welsh language provision within the education system in Bridgend. There's a desperate need for more Welsh language places in the east of the county borough, and I hope what I hope in scrutiny going forward is that we have pre-decision scrutiny, not just after the event,
yeah,
not just after cabinet takes place. And I also want to hear from external partners. So bringing in people to give evidence before the committees so that we can provide recommendations to Cabinet before they actually take decisions, not after they take decisions. So that's the plan going forward for the rest of the year. And obviously, if you are able to change your day, I'll be happy to join you
Yeah,
again.
I'll get you. I will change. It's not a problem for me. Talking about giving evidence, I am giving evidence to Seneth this week on the temporary housing situation, emergency housing situation I've been in over the last year because I've experienced it. I was mentioned by Councillor Steve Bledsoe that this was going on, so I emailed, and I've got to give evidence on Wednesday to the
Okay.
all author of the report. So if you want me to give evidence in your meeting, I'm happy to do that
Okay, great.
because being in the system now, I've got a understanding of what goes on and how people are feeling and what can be probably done to help people a bit more in this thing. So I'm here anytime.
Okay, well,
I'll
as I said,
tell it from my view.
Councillor Paul Davis is in the chair next Monday.
Mm,
So it's not going to be my committee that, well, we're joining them as a
yeah,
joint meeting, but I'll just be an ordinary member for that meeting. Then we're discussing housing again next year. So, um,
yeah,
perhaps we can bring you in at some point to provide your experience of the housing sector
yeah.
at that point.
Well, it's the emergency housing system, and I was part of what happened with the Atlantic and the Fairways, so I can see it from that perspective as well.
Sure.
I will say the council staff were fantastic in the end. They worked miracles, and I'll give Councillor Good his dues. He came down and spoke to us for 2 days, and Martin Morgan came down and
Yeah,
spoke to us for 3 days. And there, I can't fault him for any of what they did there.
good, good.
Stuff afterwards and stuff leading up to it. That yes, there are things, but that 1 week, the council staff worked miracles,
Well,
and they deserve
be
the
aware,
credit.
as you'll be aware from looking at the committee meeting where we scrutinised this, we rehearsed all of it in detail. I think we came to
Mm,
an agreement that lessons could have been learned from the whole process. But I have to say, I do attribute a lot of the blame to some of the commercial providers which were
mm,
holding the local authority over a barrel.
yeah,
And on that basis, the procurement of these emergency housing solutions, when they're reaching the end of their uh, contract period, needs to happen a lot earlier so that people
yeah.
are not able to hold the local authority to ransom.
Mm. And I think this was what Councillor Good said, and I think he said it in your scrutiny
Yes.
meeting. The biggest problem was communication,
Yeah,
and yeah, communication needed to be a whole lot better. Anyway,
absolutely.
thank you very much for joining me today, Alex, and I look forward to having you on again soon. See if we can get a Labour member to debate you.
My
I've
pleasure.
had one. I've had one. I've had
Oh,
Councillor Good
good.
on. He
Oh,
came
excellent.
on, and we talked about that, which was great, and it was good, and it's good to have a Labour
Okay, well,
councillor on.
if we can bring Councillor Good and Ross and Amanda on all at the same time, we can have
Yeah,
a proper debate and a good chat about everything. So keep me up to date, and
I will.
look forward to joining you again soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex.
Bye. Take care.
Bye.